And the recording will be placed on the workshop website within a couple of days for your reference. Also, we have the slides of the presentation that we're going to make available. I will put that in the chat there. You can follow along and use it for reference. There are a lot of hopefully useful links in there. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing that presentation. And we'll get started.
So Brian, should I say a few words about Q&A and putting questions in the chat?
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm Janice Lee. I'm the Chief Scientist of Gemini. I'll be moderating this session. And please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along. There are 3 components to the workshop today, and we'll stop at each interval for each new feature of the call for proposals. And when we come to that point, I'll look in the chat and try to thread together common questions and then ask them and ask Brian to, or ask Brian to address them, or else I will address them. If there are remaining questions in the chat that we can't get to today, we will be sure to reach out and answer those questions.
Okay, thanks. So quickly, what we'll be going over are the major changes in the 2022B call for proposals and how that's implemented in the phase 1 tool. So we'll be discussing a new JWST synergy option, how we are going to support dual anonymous review processes by various participants, and a new Aeon multi-facility option. So to start off, I'll hand it back to Janice for the JWST synergy.
Okay, so we've introduced a new category for this call for proposals, and the category name is JWST synergies. The idea behind the category is actually quite simple. It's to stimulate our community's thinking about science programs that can benefit from the combined capabilities of Gemini and JWST. As most of us know, JWST successfully launched December 25th of last year and has had a miraculous commissioning period. It's on track to be taking science observations 6 months about in July. And so the telescope, of course, offers extensive photometric and spectroscopic capabilities, and it spans from 0.7 to 28 microns. In the past, there have been lots of programs that have Gemini programs that have laid the groundwork for successful JWST Cycle 1 programs. And so this new JWST Synergies proposal category enables proposers to flag those programs where the science justification and experimental design is more compelling when you discuss both JWST and Gemini observations together, or when the science justification and experimental design seems incomplete without discussion of both sets of observations. So for example, a common application of this, and we've seen this before without having this category, is to use Gemini as a pathfinder to build future JWST programs. So, identifying sources for JW follow-up. And so this category will flag to the reviewers and to the NTAC that this is, it's not just the Gemini observations that should be considered here, but it's the whole package. Next slide. So some frequently asked questions when we were sending around this part of the call for proposals for comment to the board, to the stack, and to our users committee. One is, well, why should we put this in if some investigators from some countries aren't eligible to submit JWST proposals? Well, actually, the policy is that JWST is open skies telescope, and investigators of any nationality or affiliation are eligible to be a co-I or a PI on these proposals. Another question that came up, again, when we were sending this around for comment is, Won't it be confusing because it seems like it's a joint program? And do you have to award JWST program, JWST time through this category? And the answer is no. This is not a joint program per se. The policy is actually modeled after the JWST preparatory category, for those folks who are familiar with that, for the HST call for proposals, which was around for a number of semesters before JWST launched. Not semesters, cycles. And then finally, another frequently asked question is whether a specific fraction of time will be set aside for proposals that are marked to have a JWST synergy. The call says no, because we wanted to allow the NGOs, the NTACs, to have the freedom to decide how the policy would be implemented. So please consult your NGO for specific questions on how these will be considered during the NTAC review. Next slide, please. Okay, so to indicate that your proposal has synergies with JWST, again, if the combination of Gemini and JWST will lead to a more compelling scientific justification, or if the scientific justification just doesn't seem right, just discussing the Gemini observations on its own. What you'll do in the PIT is to set a new flag. It's pretty straightforward. It's there's a marker here, JWST synergies. Just use the pull down menu to select yes. And then in the science justification section, describe the goals of the entire program, and as well as in the experimental design. Describe the combined observations, whether they have already been allocated during cycle 1, or this is a program that you're imagining Gemini can help with in the future. Describe that in the experimental design and how this will support the goals of the science. Okay. With that, I think that's the summary of that category. And I'll take questions.
Just one comment so far.
Yeah.
Canada will not be using it at least this year. No other questions? We can come back later. Otherwise, I'll keep going with the next section. Okay, so many Gemini participants, who are the ones listed there on the slide, are starting to use a dual anonymous review process, which we're calling DARP in 22B, with the goal of reducing implicit or unconscious bias in the proposal evaluations, which means that the main essay parts of the proposal, the scientific justification, the experimental design, must be written in an anonymous style. Many of the participants are also using kind of a dual stage process. And in the second stage, another part of the proposal is revealed, which has team information, is not anonymized. Now, in this workshop, we're not going to go in how to anonymize your proposal. There are instructions for that on the various participant websites. In particular, there's a link there to the NOIRLab instructions page, which also includes a link to the recording of a webinar that was given last Friday, which discusses some of the NOIRLab process and how to anonymize a NOIRLab proposal. Also on the next page, there are some useful links just for your reference to the call for proposals and various NGO website links, so you can go check the specific instructions for your participant. But we are going to go over then how to use the changes in the PIT and how to submit your proposals to Gemini. So as I've suggested, supporting DARP requires splitting the previous essay section proposal form into 2 pieces. So the PIT will now require 2 PDF attachments for all but fast turnaround proposals. That will continue to have 1 attachment, which will have to be anonymized. So here you see in the overview tab of the PIT, there's now space for 2 attachments. If you click on this little down arrow button, it'll actually send you to the web page where you can download the templates, and then the little paperclip there, you can attach your final PDF that will be submitted with the proposal. So now, of course, there have to be 2 sets of templates for these 2 stages. And those are given here in the first attachment. It goes by this name. It includes what I mentioned before, the scientific justification and figures, experimental design, and various other backup plans in the ITC examples. The second attachment is for the second stage and includes its team information, which is specifics about the roles and expertise of your team, what sort of capabilities you have, and other things like publications, use of facilities, and previous use of Gemini, which can't be anonymized. So you can get those forms at this URL, which again, the PIT will take you to via those down arrows, and there's a menu as well. So here you can see are the templates for the 2 sections in both LaTeX and doc format with the necessary LaTeX style file. If you click on this proposal example link, you'll go here, and there's a complete example proposal with the 2 sections and some example PDF summaries in different formats, which I'll go over a little bit in a bit. And those are available from there. Now, we have tried to simplify things a little bit. In the past, there were participant-specific template files, which you had to keep track of. We've at least made it less complicated than it could have been. Now, everyone uses the same 2 templates that I showed before, so there's nothing partner-specific. A few things about joint proposals and these PDF summaries for joints. Even if, as you as a PI, if your participant is not using DARP, but if you're submitting to any participant that is using DARP, then the proposal must be written in anonymous style. Otherwise, it's likely to get kicked out of that DARP participants that you're submitting to. You may preview what the tax will see with the various PDF summary options in the phase 1 tool. So the little format menu is given down here with the new options. The DARP options will create the PDF summary from the PIT information, the first attachment, which would be the anonymized attachment, and then there's no investigator information listed. For the non-DARP options, which is kind of like what's in the previous PITs, the summary is created with the PIT information, the 2 attachments, and then there's options for where an investigator list might be placed. And down here in this box with the green border are the settings for the participant as they are now. So you can choose the option and see exactly what the different tags will be reading. Okay, so that's the end of the section on DARP. Do we have any questions? Does not look like it. All right, I will continue on, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. So this is about the Aeon, or the Astronomical Event Observatory Network, which is this collaboration between NOIRLab and Las Cumbres Observatory, which is developing tools and processes for automating observation requests, scheduling, and data reduction. So this is kind of aimed at time domain and multi-messenger astronomy, but it's useful for non-time domain projects as well. A lot of what we're doing is defining technical capabilities. So what we call Aeon capability, or Aeon compatible, has APIs for accepting observation requests and broadcasting status programmatically, some sort of queue observing mode, preferably automatically scheduled, a data archive for returning raw and reduced data with API access again, and real-time data reduction if possible. So this fits into the broader time domain follow-up system that the community is developing, where you have facilities and surveys generating alerts. Those are collected and categorized by brokers, such as the NOIRLab Antares broker. Then science teams put filters in the brokers to get out the types of targets that they're interested in, and those are collected in either bespoke project systems or these targeted observation manager systems, which allow you to prioritize what you have and submit observations to the observatories and receive back information. And so the observation requests go to telescope networks like Aeon. This is where Aeon comes in, where we have to collect the requests, get them efficiently scheduled and observed, get the data reduced into the archives, which then close the loop back to the science team so they can make subsequent decisions. So how does proposing for Aeon work? The way the system is organized at the moment, if you want to use the full network, it requires some multiple proposals. So all proposals for Gemini time are evaluated by the national tax as now, so that they can evaluate the time domain and non-time domain proposals together. Any companion proposals for other facilities, then they be submitted directly to those facilities that will be evaluated by those tax. For example, the NOIRLab panels, if you're proposing for Las Cumbres, the NSF time on La Cumbres or SOAR. And what we realized when we were putting this together is that the requirements for handling Aeon are basically the same as needed to handle sort of multi-facility proposals in general. So that's why you'll see labeling like Aeon and multi-facility together. It handles Aeon, but it's a little more general than that. So while all the time that you're going to request on these multi-facility proposals is desired and needed, some of the facilities and instrument combinations may be more critical than others. And we want to be able to track those particular cases. So you'll be able to indicate whether parts of the facilities that you're applying for are required, meaning the project is not viable without those. So for example, you're applying for DECAM time to find supernovae, which you then want to follow up with other facilities like SOAR or Gemini. In this case, the DECAM time would be required because you can't do anything else without the events, the targets. One thing is these required selections will not be shown to the tax to avoid any bias, so they don't try to de-emphasize things that you say are not required in this case, in this sense. And so how does this work in the pit? So we've added Aeon multi-facility options to the Q and classical proposal options, as you can see here in the time request tab. If you are putting together one of these multi-facility proposals, then you should use this little menu to select Aeon multi-facility yes. That activates this little sort of package icon here. If you click on that, you get this little pop-up with this time required interface where it'll give you a list of the sites and instruments you're applying for, and you can mark whether any of these happens to meet this required situation. Then, of course, you'll need to justify the roles of the different facilities and how the project will work together in your experimental design and use of other facilities sections. So similar changes have been made to the CSTC NOIRLab proposal form. If you're putting together a multi-facility proposal and you've got a Gemini companion proposal, you should again select multi-facility yes here, and then the various pieces can help merge them together later. And then when you're configuring the runs, if one of these meets the sort of case of being required for the project, there's a little toggle here to specify that. Also, various facilities and modes are Aeon modes, meaning there's a Q modes, and you can specify that in the observing mode pull down there if it applies. All right, so what's going to then happen to the proposals during the tax and after the tax process? So we are instructing that the national tax to assume that all time for these companion proposals should be assumed to be granted. So there's no debate over if time is granted or not, just for purposes of the science, assume that the time will be granted. Then, as sort of alluded to, the CSTC NOIRLab system will try to use this Aeon multifacility flag in the different proposals to try to join up the different pieces. So in the panels, the Gemini and the CSTC proposals are together and being evaluated as a single project as much as possible. After the TACs have met, observatory staff will try to track the results of the TAC priorities and the telescope scheduling process to identify if any of these required facilities does not get scheduled. And then if that happens to be the case, we're going to communicate with the PIs, with the teams, and if potentially remove the other parts of the project, which now are no longer viable because this required piece was not scheduled. Now, especially this first round, we're going to try to be really conservative with this and try to communicate well with people if this happens to be the case, so there are no surprises. So just final examples of use of this option. One, if you're applying only to Gemini for time domain or anything else, then there's really no need to select Aeon multifacility, even though basically all Gemini observations are Aeon mode. There's no great harm if you do it. It sort of emphasizes maybe the time domain aspect of it, but it might cause some confusion for the observatory staff because we might be looking for other pieces of this proposal. The other example is like what I've kind of been going through these slides. You're applying for one proposal to the CSTC NOIRLab system for DECAM imaging and SOAR and Las Cumbres follow-up, and then you put in a companion proposal for Gemini time for GMOS and F2 follow-up of maybe the fainter targets. So then you would set the multi-facility option to yes in both proposal systems, and you would set that like this DECAM time would be required in this particular case. And so that is a description of all the new options. And so we are open for any final questions.
Steph asks, does a Canadian-led Aeon companion proposal for Las Cumbres or SOAR, does it have to be submitted by the NOIRLab deadline, which is March 31st, or is it okay to submit by the Canadian deadline, which is one day later?
A good question. Normally, the deadline would be set by the deadline of the PI's participant. So that would suggest it would be the Canadian deadline.
Okay, I told my PIs in the instructions to do it by the NOIRLab deadline just in case, because it's not really a Gemini proposal, right? So I wasn't sure.
Right, the Gemini proposal can certainly go in.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, the other companion proposal probably better, yes, to use the NOIRLab deadline.
Okay.
Yes, because that's not through Gemini. Yes, that's a very good question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Let's continue with an Aeon question. Gonzalo Diaz asks, is there a limit of hours that will be dedicated to Aeon proposals this semester?
No time is dedicated to it. It's just what the priorities the TACs give and how much they feel they want to support. It's up to each participant.
But the principal evaluation criteria will be scientific merit still.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Miji Jung asks, for Gemini proposals, if US and Korea researchers collaborate, should DARP, should it be written as a dual anonymous proposal? And if so, does a proposal need to prepare for DARP if the PI is Korean.
In that case, yes, it should be anonymized. If it's going to the US, then the whole proposal will need to be anonymized. Or the attachment 1 will need to be anonymized.
Any follow-up questions on that, Miji? Or is it clear?
I have a question. What if the proposal is not fully anonymized in a DARP submission? What is that the TAC that decides what to do with it, or are there specific rules already put in place for that situation?
My understanding is that will be up to the individual participant, TAC staff to decide what to do with it. From what was given, for example, at the NOIRLab session last Friday, this sort of question came up. And for example, the TAC staff there will review the proposals and look for anything that's not anonymized correctly. And if they catch that and there's time, they will try to work with the PIs to fix it. If they're egregious errors that are not caught, there is the risk that the proposal will be not evaluated. But because this is like one of the early semesters for this process, for some, especially this is the first one for NOIRLab, I think people are going to try to be a little lenient and work with people to fix the proposals before it gets rejected.
Yeah, but disqualification, I think it would need to be sort of a flagrant violation of the policies. It would seem that, it's a conscious being just ignoring the policy altogether rather than just some mistake or misinterpretation. Steph had a comment in the chat, and she says that similarly for the Canadian TAC, any proposal, even if not led by a Canadian, must follow dual anonymous policy. Great.
Well, I'll put another one then. For the JWST synergy, there's a section for that. What is expected in that section? How much level of detail the synergy should be described? Is it just if there's something already going on, or if it's just something that you have in mind for the future? What is expected in that section?
Right, so both are possible. So if you have an approved cycle 1 proposal that would benefit from companion Gemini observations, and if describing the Gemini observations on their own wouldn't be very compelling, then both of the observations together should be described, and should be described in a way that supports the scientific justification, scientific goals. There have been, again, many programs in the past, which have, before we even had this category now, that have been preparing for JWST and have mentioned JWST in the proposal. As I said, a very common application would be, we need Gemini to identify targets for follow-up with JWST. And, we can't just use JWST from the get-go because we don't know if these targets are verified high redshift galaxies, or if I'm going to follow up a transit, that the timing will be right. And so you can make a case in the proposal that you'll need Gemini to create a program that will be compelling for JWST. And then again, always the primary criteria for evaluation is the scientific merit. But sometimes you need to see the whole picture instead of just the Gemini portion. And that is the purpose of the category. But yeah, that will mark that in the scientific justification and in the second section that both will be described. And that will allow people to understand why both are being described rather than just the focus on Gemini.
No other questions, or then let's wrap this up. Just a reminder that we will be putting the recording of this on the workshop webpage, which I just put in the chat. Also, next time that page updates, it will also have links to the PDF of these slides there. And is there another questions coming in? The recording to the talk you mentioned from Friday. Yes, it is on the NOIRLab website. The link is in the presentation at the bottom of one of those slides. You can go there directly.
I can also put it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, there.
And that's the link to the video recording for NOIRLab DARP.
Okay, then. Thank you everyone for attending. And good luck with all your proposals.